plane is flying in the sky and within moments it crashes into icy mountains and shatters completely. Cold winds, hunger, thirst, and deathly silence all around. Can a human survive in such a place? This is the story of those people who did not give up hope even in impossible conditions and defeated death to show the world what courage truly looks like. The date was 12 October 1972. A chartered aircraft took off from the small South American country of Uruguay. Its destination was Santiago, the capital of Chile. On board were energetic rugby team players, their families, and some friends. Altogether, 45 people. The journey was not very long. Normally, this trip takes only 3 hours. But the biggest challenge of this route was the world's longest mountain range, the Andes. This is the same mountain range known for having the highest peaks after the Himalayas. But that day, these beautiful mountains became the most dangerous test of these passengers' lives. On the night of the 12th of October, a severe storm gathered in the sky. Sensing the danger, the pilots decided to land the aircraft in the Argentine city of Mendoza so that the journey could continue the next day once the weather cleared. On the 13th of October at around 2 p.m., the plane took off once again. The initial journey was calm and pleasant. The clouds had cleared and everything seemed normal. But as the clock ticked past 3 p.m., the silence began to break. The aircraft started descending between the mountains. Suddenly, the plane was caught in severe turbulence. The entire aircraft began to shake violently up and down. Outside the windows, only dense clouds were visible. Warning alarms began blaring loudly. Red lights started flashing continuously. Panic was clearly visible on the passengers' faces, but some rugby players tried to show courage by making light jokes. Then one player looked outside. At first, he thought the clouds were clearing, but as soon as the view became clear, the color drained from his face. Right in front of them was a massive rock cliff, terrifyingly close. The pilots panicked and immediately tried to pull the plane upward. And this is where the real battle between life and death began. The aircraft's ground collision alarm screamed continuously. The pilots put in all their strength and pushed the engines to maximum power. There was only one goal: to somehow clear the mountain in front. But luck had abandoned them. While climbing at high speed, the rear of the aircraft suddenly struck the rock face. With a massive explosion, the rear portion broke apart and separated in. Some passengers seated at the back were thrown out instantly and disappeared into the clouds forever within seconds. The aircraft was still trying to climb, but the struggle did not last long. Suddenly, its left wing also broke off. More passengers fell screaming into the abyss below. Now only the front portion of the plane remained, out of control, heading straight toward an icy glacier. At a speed of nearly 350 kilometers per hour, the aircraft slid across the frozen surface. After skidding for about 700 meters, there was one final horrific impact. After that, the aircraft structure completely disintegrated. Seats were ripped from the floor and thrown outside. The cockpit was completely destroyed. Both pilots died. Instantly now, this broken aircraft lay among the frozen snow, at an altitude of 3,570 meters, in the unknown heights of the Andes. The shocking thing was that despite this terrifying crash, 33 out of 45 passengers were still alive. Most were injured, and no one had any idea where they were trapped. Gradually it became clear that the plane had deviated nearly 80 kilometers from its actual route. And now the real story was about to begin, a survival story that neither the passengers imagined at the time, nor perhaps you can imagine even now. This is the hair-raising tale of Flight 571, and this is only the beginning. Immediately after the crash, 19-year-old Roberto Canessa, a medical student, sprang into action. Another medical student was with him. Both decided that they had to help as many survivors as possible. They saw many passengers were badly injured. One of them was 23-year-old Fernando Parado, who had suffered such a severe head injury that he had gone into a coma. The students continued their efforts, but the situation was out of control. Meanwhile, news had already spread in the cities. Within just 1 hour of the plane going missing, Chile's air search and rescue team was alerted. 4 aircraft were immediately dispatched to the area. The search continued from evening until late night, but with 0 results. The problem was that the plane was white, and the crash site was surrounded entirely by white snow and glaciers. From the air, there was no difference between the shattered aircraft and the icy mountains. On the first night of the 13th of October, the survivors waited with hope that someone would find them by morning. But in the freezing cold, 5 severely injured passengers did not survive the night. The number of survivors dropped to 28. The survivors turned the broken aircraft structure into a shelter. Using luggage, seats, and snow, they tried to block the rear section to retain at least some warmth inside. The next day was the 14th of October. This time the search operation was even larger. 11 aircraft from Argentina, Chile, and Uruguay took off together. The crash site was actually within their selected search area, yet no one spotted it. Meanwhile, the survivors tried various ways to save themselves. They used lipstick to write SOS on the roof of the plane, but soon realized they did not have enough lipstick to complete it. Then they arranged large suitcases on the snow to form a giant cross so passing aircraft could see them. But despite repeated attempts, nothing worked. That day felt like fate was playing a cruel joke on them. Not 1, not 2, but 3 aircraft passed directly over them. The survivors shouted at the top of their lungs, waved their hands, and tried everything possible to be seen. But among the white mountains and white wreckage, their cries were swallowed by the snow. Another day passed between hope and despair. On the morning of the 15th of October, it became clear that if they wanted to survive, they had to secure water. One passenger, Fito Strau, came up with a brilliant solution. He used a metal sheath like a solar collector, focused sunlight on it, melted snow, and made water. Drop by drop, he filled empty wine bottles. This discovery became a lifeline for everyone. They also found new uses for their limited belongings. Seat cushions were cut to make snowshoes. Wool from seat covers was stuffed into clothing to protect against the cold. Every small thing had now become a thread between life and death. By the 16th of October, 3 days had passed since the crash, and 23-year-old Fernando Parrados slowly began to wake from his coma. What he saw upon opening his eyes broke his heart. His mother had already died in the crash, and his 19-year-old sister was badly injured. Parrado did everything he could to save her, bringing her food and water every day and encouraging her. But against the cruel cold of the mountains, human struggle can only last so long. After 8 days, his sister also took her last breath. Most of the passengers were people who had spent their entire lives near the sea. They never imagined they would be trapped in snow-covered mountains, bone-freezing temperatures of -30 degrees Celsius, thin air at high altitude, no food, no water, yet still the struggle to survive continued. Amid these harsh conditions, another problem emerged: snow blindness. When intense sunlight reflects off snow into the eyes, it can cause loss of vision, and the survivors had only 3 pairs of sunglasses for the entire group. On the 21st of October, 8 days after the crash, the search and rescue teams finally gave up. After more than 145 hours of continuous searching, they concluded that no one could still be alive. The rescue operation was officially called off. Amid the wreckage, however, they found a small glimmer of hope: a transistor radio. Miraculously, it was still functional. Rugby player Roy Harley, who had knowledge of electronics, tried to fix it. A long improvised antenna was made, and the radio finally worked. But it was only one-way communication. They could hear news from the outside world, but could not send any messages. On the 11th day after the crash, when they turned on the radio, the news shattered them. The search operation had officially been stopped. Some broke down crying, others clasped their hands and prayed. For the first time, they realized the world considered them dead. But amid this, one man sat quietly. Fernando Parrado. His face showed deep pain, but his eyes held a different spark. A plan was forming in his mind that could change everyone's fate. By the 11th day, conditions had become even worse. Hunger began to break the survivors. At first, they had very little: 8 chocolate bars, 1 small tin of mussels, 3 jars of jam, some almonds, dates, plums, candies, and a few bottles of wine. Everything was rationed from the start, just a pinch of food each day. So little that Parrado survived for 3 days by sucking on a single chocolate-coated peanut. But even this did not last long. At an altitude of 3,800 meters, there were no trees, no grass, no animals. The truth was that all food was gone. Some even tried to eat cotton and leather from the plane seats, but the result was terrible vomiting and illness. Now the question was, die of hunger, or take a step so horrifying that even imagining it made the soul tremble. And then the unthinkable happened. The survivors decided that to stay alive, they would have to eat the bodies of their deceased friends, classmates, even family members. This decision was not made in a moment. Everyone's heart resisted it, but after 2 more days without food, when starvation was certain, they slowly accepted this reality. Roberto Canessa was the first to show courage. He decided that if this was the only way to live, he would do it. Some tried but could not tolerate it and refused. But as time passed and no other options remained, others followed. On the 29th of October, the 16th day after the crash, this new food source also began to run out. The survivors had no next plan. Only one question remained: how long? And as if things were not bad enough, that night the mountains roared. A thunderous sound echoed through the area. Within seconds, a massive avalanche came crashing down and completely buried the wreckage. 8 people were killed under the snow. Only 19 survivors remained, each feeling their next breath might be their last. They were trapped in a very tight space under the snow, suffocating. Fernando Parado picked up a metal rod and began digging. After hours of effort, he created a small vent for air. Over 2 days, they dug a tunnel and finally emerged on the surface. But outside awaited another dangerous snowstorm. They were forced to return to the snow cave. For 3 days, the 19 people huddled together in darkness and cold. When the storm finally ended, it became clear no one was coming to save them. The question now was whether they would wait for death or fight until the last breath. They chose to fight. The strongest were Roberto Canessa, Fernando Parado, and Visit 10. The group gave these 3 the best clothes and extra rations. As they would attempt to walk out and find help, they believed that if they walked west, they would reach rural Chile. They did not know the co-pilot himself had misjudged the location. The crash had actually occurred 89 kilometers east of Curico, deep in the Andes. But unaware of this, on the 15th of November, the 33rd day after the crash, they set out. After hours of walking, they found the plane's tail section. Inside were suitcases containing chocolates, meat, patties, rum, clothes, comics, medicines, and most importantly, a two-way radio. But the batteries were too heavy and incompatible. Hope faded again. Walking out was the only option. On the 11th of December, another avalanche killed 3 more people. Only 16 remained. Then Carlos Miguel Rodriguez sewed a giant sleeping bag from clothes. On the 12th of December, 2 months after the crash, Parado, Canessa, and Vicentin set out west. They climbed glaciers without gear, fought thin air, freezing cold, and exhaustion. After days, Vicentin returned. Parado and Canessa continued, reached the peak, saw endless snow, but finally spotted distant peaks without snow. That was their hope. After many days, they reached a valley with a river. They followed it for 9 days, until, on the 20th of December, they saw cows, fields, and signs of life. Across the river, they saw horsemen. They shouted. One heard them. The next day, a note was passed. Parado wrote a desperate message asking for help. The farmer Sergio Canessa rode for 10 hours to get help. Helicopters were sent. On the 22nd of December, 1972, after 70 days, 16 survivors were rescued. This was not an ordinary rescue. It was the greatest victory of human courage and hope. This is why the world remembers it as the miracle of the Andes.